Dr. Fauci has been one of the right's biggest boogeymen since 2019. Well, more so 2020. They claim that at every point where the CDC, the WHO, and all of our medical professionals and public speakers that are meant to communicate about health with the public, any time that they've been wrong has been them deliberately lying and killing the American people. This has been a problem for years now when it comes to dealing with the right, and particularly MAGA. They have been arguing that any case in which, say for example, early in the pandemic, it was not known for sure if masks would help to reduce the spread of COVID. It was believed that maybe it would help to prevent people who are already sick with COVID from spreading it, but it probably isn't too effective for the person wearing it to like prevent getting, breathing in COVID particles, right? And I believe that is what the science ended up settling on, but at the time it was just a theory, right? And basically what Fauci did was he claimed, if I remember right, that the masks, we don't know if they work or not, so don't bother buying them. But the reason he did this was because we didn't know for sure if the masks worked or not, and if they do work, we want them to be in the hands of the medical professionals dealing with COVID patients in hospitals, not getting bought out and sold out to random people panic buying like they did with toilet paper. And they did everything they could, Fauci did everything he could, to prevent people from panic buying PPE equipment like they did with toilet paper and leaving none for hospitals. There was a lot of PPE shortages that hospitals had to deal with, and they didn't want that to get worse, but the right has gotten away with claiming it was deliberate lies meant to hurt the American people for a while now. And so fire Fauci and now arrest Fauci has been a talking point from these crazy anti-vaxxers for years now. Hell, the more radical of them believe that Fauci killed millions of Americans with the vaccine.
Around Fauci's secret COVID diary is blowing up, why MAGA is claiming it's the smoking gun, and things are just gonna get even crazier soon. What's really going on with the Mamdani grocery store?
So yeah, we got a Philly D video here about this Fauci situation that's only getting crazier in these more recent days.
Backlash, where the names behind some of the most disturbing Epstein emails might be about to finally be exposed. We're talking about all of that and even more on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show. You daily dive into the news, starting with this. Let's talk about this Fauci diaries scandal, because you have MAGA again calling for the head of Anthony Fauci after Senator Rand Paul released more than 1,000 pages of Fauci's personal diary from during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's part of his investigation into whether the COVID-19 virus might have leaked from a Chinese laboratory.
His personal diary? Damn, okay.
And whether, as Paul claims, Fauci lied to Congress about. But the diary, it doesn't actually provide the evidence that Paul and many others seem to think that it does. And
yeah, we know.
Instead, it largely shows that Fauci was dealing with a fast-moving crisis that science was struggling to keep up with. But, and it is a big but, that is not to say that it paints Fauci in a positive light. You have it showing that he may have lied about some things, and he at times appeared obsessed with his own fame. And so with all this, you have some MAGA personalities calling for his imprisonment, some supporters calling for his death, all while he is now set to testify before Congress in what is definitely going to be a heated hearing tomorrow. But also, if you're not aware, scientists still have not definitively concluded where the virus originated. And so the debate over whether it may have leaked from a Chinese laboratory, either accidentally or on purpose, it's still been raging all this time. And you have much of the conversation.
I think Philly D is kind of wrong about this particular detail. I believe not only is the majority consensus as it stands that it most likely jumped from animal to human from the Wuhan wet market, which is like one of the biggest like live animal containing markets in the world. Like the epidemiologists since like 30 years ago have predicted and have used the Wuhan wet market specifically as an example of a place that will one day inevitably result in a global pandemic. It's the reason why everyone was talking about Wuhan and wet market right away. Bats, pangolins, whatever it may be, it was a talking point right away, not because we had research on that because of COVID, but because epidemiologists had been warning about that particular wet market and the danger it risked when it comes to disease for decades. It was like once it was traced to Wuhan, China, epidemiologists were like, oh, did it finally happen? Did it finally happen? And from what I understand, the evidence we have still suggests the wet market is more likely. It just doesn't really seem likely that it came from a lab. I think their claim is that there is a lab in Wuhan, like a gain-of-function lab in Wuhan that it could have like sprung from or been deliberately released from. Well, you would have to argue that it broke loose on accident because, it started in Wuhan, right? Why would they release it in China if they were trying to hurt America or I guess the rest of the world? They took it seriously and tried to prevent it from spreading even outside of China. Like right away, China took it seriously. So I don't know. I don't buy any explanation right now other than it came from the wet market.
Focusing on the question of whether the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which Fauci led for nearly 40 years, had funded so-called gain-of-function research at a lab in Wuhan. Right, and gain-of-function research? That basically involves messing with the genetic makeup of viruses to study them better and ultimately prevent pandemics. But you also have a hypothetical risk there that a superpowered virus could get out and can't be stopped. Now Fauci, he repeatedly insisted that his institute never funded this type of research in China and that the most likely origin of the COVID-19 vaccine was in nature. But you have people like Rand Paul claiming otherwise.
I'm sorry, but virus breaks out of lab and spreads across the world, global pandemic. The people who believe this have watched way too many movies, let's be real. That is not what fucking happened, okay? And there's a reason why the epidemiological community did not agree with this claim and still doesn't.
And arguing that as a result, Fauci might bear personal responsibility for millions of COVID-19 deaths in the United States and around the world. And then this week, you had Paul announcing that his years-long investigation into the origins of the virus uncovered that Fauci kept this diary. You had Paul claiming that what Fauci wrote privately and what he told the country are two different stories. And he said that he was releasing Fauci's entries from December 2019 through December 2022, which is more than 11.
I'm guessing none of what we're about to see is going to be new. We know for a fact that Fauci didn't necessarily lie, but even if he did, it was because he arguably had to, right? When you are trying to communicate medical related information to the public, and you need them to not panic, and you need to control their behavior so they do what is best, sometimes lying is what's best. Oh my god, here's a good example, all right? Have you guys all seen The Odyssey? Have you all seen The Odyssey? The new movie? From Christopher Nolan, the adaptation of the poem. Spoiler alert for a 3,000-year-old story. But there is a point where Odysseus has to make a choice. He can either try to sail his ship past Charybdis, the giant whirlpool, which his men may want to do, but will guaranteed result in him and his entire crew dying. Or they can steer past Scylla on the other side of the channel. They can steer past Scylla, a six-headed monster that will eat its fill of 6 men from the ship, but no more, and the ship will not be destroyed. So it is a trolley problem situation. Sacrifice yourself and your whole crew for maybe possibly a chance at getting everyone out alive, but more likely everyone dies. Or guarantee the death of 6 men to guarantee the survival of the ship and everybody else to get home. And it's important Odysseus doesn't tell his crew. They can't know that 6 of them will die, or they'll choose to go through the whirlpool instead. So he doesn't tell them, and makes the choice. He lies to his crew by omission, essentially, and saves most of their lives, for the time being, in doing so. Sometimes, when you're in a leading position, you do have to lie to the fucking sheep, otherwise the sheep will run off of a cliff and kill themselves. That is a reality that is so true of large groups of people that it is a thing in the Bible, it is a thing in Homer's poems, it is a thing in every ancient story up to modern tellings and real life experiences you can imagine, okay? Hell, in the Bible, Moses was constantly struggling to get the Israelites to actually follow God. They built a giant golden calf to worship instead, just to have a false idol, right? It's hard to deal with large groups of people who just seem to want to destroy themselves, that just seems to be how it goes. Sometimes you gotta lie to them or manipulate them to protect them.
100 pages. While Rand Paul hasn't explained how he got this diary, it's typewritten, so it looks like Fauci may have taken notes on his work computer, possibly for his memoir, which was published in 2024. You've got Paul and others arguing that it shows Fauci was lying about the origin of the virus, pointing to what he wrote on January 26, 2020, which was, now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier.
We have to print, do not eat this silica packet when you buy a new pair, any new pair of shoes or whatever. Yeah, true. Good point.
Or with that, appearing to reference the Wuhan fish market that had early on been thought to be a key site for the start and spread of the virus. But what you didn't have Paul pointing out is that Fauci followed that up by writing, having said that, somewhere the virus jumped from animals to human. And Rand also notably didn't explain that all of this is exactly consistent with statements made by Fauci publicly around the same time. And that includes at a scientific conference the same week and in an interview with USA Today less than a month later, or when he used the exact same language describing the market as an amplifier for something that was already going on. Also, he failed to mention that just a few days later, Fauci still described claims that the virus had been deliberately or accidentally released in Wuhan as conspiracy theories that so far lacked evidence. Though then also very notably, in that same entry, Fauci said that he had heard from experts who believed that certain mutations of the virus could not have occurred naturally. And he said that he had suggested getting a larger group of experts together to carefully look at this. And with that meeting then taking place,
that is not even close to a smoking gun. If anything, that's Fauci acknowledging some fringe possible theories from certain people in the scientific community and being like, yeah, they're on the fringe, but let's get some more experts together to review what they're claiming and see if they're onto something, because we need answers.
the next day via conference call.
That sounds like him doing his due diligence, even if it means, like, betting on long shots, just to be sure. Like, that actually makes me respect him a little bit more, but there could be some stuff here that, like, I would say the worst thing that Fauci ever did was his handling of AIDS in the 80s. That was, like, the OG thing that people didn't like Fauci for, and still shouldn't. But, like, his handling of COVID was not... Like, could it have been done better by someone else? Maybe? But also, this is one of those situations where people are so hindsight poisoned. Like, I feel like anybody could have been in his position and done what you would logically do and reasonably do in the moment, and then everyone would look back in hindsight and try to demonize them.
So this is very anecdotal, but I had an old Muslim co-worker who explained the reasons against pork was because back then, people didn't handle pork properly. Easier to say God hates it. Christians and shellfish also.
Yeah, that's not even like a religious explanation. That's like the historical consensus, I believe, is that the reason why Jews and like Islamic worshippers don't eat pork is because, obviously, pigs, I think, were present in like Mediterranean coastal Middle East at the time, but goats were favored because goats chew their own cud, and this means that they're I think there's nothing about that means they're actually cleaner as a meat source, but I think it's that goat you can actually just cook kind of rare and probably be fine. If you're just, assuming it's not ground goat meat, you can kind of cook that and be fine. But with pork, much like with what happened with RFK Jr., if you do not thoroughly cook pork, you will probably get a parasite eventually. Like you have to be, like, the best way to cook pork to guarantee it's safe is to cook it until it is literally falling apart tender from either smoking or cooking it in a stew for hours, or for like an hour at a relatively high heat, till it's just cooked thoroughly. That is the safest and best way to consume pork. But yeah, the consensus is that's where it comes from. And yeah, that it was just better to teach. God doesn't like it. It's a sin to eat it because it'll save lives. That's a really good example of that, actually. It's a really good example. Of course, you'll never convince like evangelicals that like of any kind that any religious rule from God was practically designed and not literally a divine rule from God.
And Fauci said in emails at the time that if they found evidence of a lab leak, they would have to alert appropriate authorities, including the FBI. But then also after the meeting, he wrote in his diary that only 2 of the 11 other scientists on the call were convinced that the virus had occurred naturally, whereas, quote, the rest felt that deliberate insertion was possible. And so Paul also pointed to this entry to argue the scientific establishment was more divided than Fauci let on in public, writing, this was never a 50-50 room. But there, you've seen pushback, people saying scientists armed with little information and refusing to rule out a possibility. That is not the same as saying that they believed that theory or had solid evidence to support it. And then noting that the consensus...
Exactly. Yep. 100%. The anti-vaxxers have 0 points, and they are not even a little bit right about this situation. There's no ground that I will give these people on the topic of Fauci, the vaccines, the handling of COVID, any of that. These people were wrong from day 0.
That eventually emerged among most virologists was for natural animal to human transmission as the most likely origin. Right, and you had one from Tulane University telling NPR that there's just no actual evidence for the lab leak theory, and also noting that no one, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology, had a precursor virus similar enough to COVID-19 virus to create the pathogen that ultimately caused the pandemic. And in fact, the scientists who initially told Fauci that they thought that the virus might have come from
Also, SARS-CoV, which, by the way, is a category of virus that is very broad and very common. Like, we've known about it for a while, and there are a lot of different varieties. COVID-19 specifically, and all of its mutations that we got, like the Delta variant and the spiky throat variant, that was one, by the way, that existed. The Omicron variant, etc. All that stuff, like, those COVIDs are related to a COVID virus umbrella category that we have watched in animals, particularly in bats and pangolins, which are both present in the Wuhan wet market, by the way. The Wuhan wet market, which is literally where we have the earliest tracings of COVID's existence. A place where epidemiologists have said for decades, warned for decades, is inevitably going to produce a world-spanning pandemic. And then one happens, and all the signs point to the Wuhan wet market, and we decide it can't be that, because we need to be racist. We need to claim that China deliberately poisoned the world. Listen, you guys know I'm not like Hassan. I'm not like a China propagandist type, but like, China didn't create COVID and spread it around the world. They're not evil, okay? Like, China's not a great country government-wise. They don't have the best stuff when it comes to civil rights. They're doing some pretty bad stuff to like the Uyghur Muslim population, for instance, and you know, they're imperialist, colonialist stuff, like with Taiwan and whatnot. Not a big fan of, you know, free Hong Kong. But they did not poison the world. I don't think they would do that.
From a lab prompting that whole conference call, you later had them saying that more extensive analysis,
except for with pollution. They did that for a while, but now they're pretty green.
And new data led them to say they didn't believe any type of laboratory-based scenario was plausible. And Fauci, while he publicly downplayed the possibility of a lab leak from the very beginning, he did consistently refuse to make definitive statements. Where with him, for example, expressing his view in a 2021 entry writing, I had always said that the very high likelihood is that the virus originated naturally from an animal reservoir jumping to a human. Then adding, however, over the past couple of days, given the amount of speculation about the possibility of a lab leak, I have been saying that no one is 100% certain of the origin, including me, and so I am calling for a thorough investigation. And adding, calling for an investigation is merely to put to rest the extraordinary amount of speculation and conspiracy theories. And going on to say, however, this is being interpreted as Fauci flip-flopping again. The far right is really amazing in their distortion of reality. Now with
literally watch, oh my god, if you are anybody who is like tapped in, okay, does anyone here watch like Mini Minuteman, Professor Dave Explains, or any of these other creators who are known for debunking conspiracy theorists and misinformation peddlers from a scientific or geographical or historical or geological perspective? Like, have you ever watched that community of content creators and seen the way that these bullshit peddlers will lie incessantly, but oddly their lies are somewhat consistent, right? Oh, does that kind of look like the petrified giant in the side of a mountain? Guys, it's a giant, it's a giant. Oh, the pyramids are made with lasers by aliens. You know, there's consistency to their insanity and their nonsense that they push. But if you're a scientist, depending on the issue, these people are able to point to, well, how come the scientific consensus was this in the past, but now it's this now? You people can't even be consistent. They'll point to a lack of consistency in the scientific process, or consistency in conclusions throughout the scientific process as a claim that science is not trustworthy. Meanwhile, what they fundamentally don't understand is that the scientific process is the most valuable and rigorous method through which you can come to a conclusion. Conclusions that survive the scientific process are the best conclusions you could get. Yes, things will change. The whole point of science is if we find new information, we change our conclusions. But the fact that we change our conclusions is literally weaponized by pseudoscientists and bullshit peddlers to claim that those who believe in science are inconsistent and liars. And that's what we're seeing right now. This is straight out of the pseudoscientist bullshit peddler playbook, what they're using against Fauci.
that, you know, not everyone in the executive agreed with Fauci, with the FBI assessing as far back as 2021 that the virus most likely emerged in a lab incident in Wuhan. You also had Fauci writing at the time that the FBI has no idea what they're talking about and adding, the reasons that they give do not make any sense. Also, in January 2025, you had the CIA
what's the FBI fucking know about the epidemic?
becoming the second intelligence agency to come out in favor of the lab leak hypothesis, but even they acknowledge that the finding was made.
Kash Patel's FBI and Tulsi Gabbard's CIA. Didn't Tulsi Gabbard get fired, though? think she got fired.
With low confidence. And ultimately, there was no smoking gun there, and there was also no evidence there that Fauci had solid information that with all this he had withheld or lied about. And while you can definitely still have something to criticize about the handling of the situation, this is just kind of how it is right now. Just like it is also true that there are other things that Fauci may actually have been less than honest about. And so at that 2022 interview, for example, you had Fauci saying that he had nothing to do with school closures during the pandemic. But in March of 2020, he wrote in his diary that he had convinced Mayor Bill de Blasio to close city schools. And he also said that California...
Like, sure. I mean, yeah, he lied about that, but looking back at it, knowing how many people died from COVID, was it a bad thing that he pressured schools to be closed during COVID when he had Trump and all of his cronies fighting to keep everything open and allow the virus to continue spreading? Like, Fauci had to get underhanded and play a bit dirty to save American lives, and now they're finally using it against him.
Governor Gavin Newsom had decided to close the schools in California as well as the bars and restaurants based on Fauci's suggestion. Though notably, while Fauci's also gotten a lot of the blame for mask mandates, he actually wrote in his diary that he really had a problem defending the ultra-conservative approach of the CDC regarding the wearing of masks outdoors. And then with that, when the policy did change, you had him writing, "The radical right-wing maniacs who blamed me for the rigidity of the CDC recommendations will probably not realize at all that it was me that triggered this change." Also, you had Fauci writing about his relationship and interactions with Trump. And sometimes he described it very positively, but ultimately he painted a picture of a kind of doddering, distracted old man even back then. Right, this
Damn. Real.
This was more than 5 years ago, and so, for example, you had him writing what he described as a disturbingly rambling discussion with Trump, since he kept talking about TV ratings and hydroxychloroquine and influenza and virtually everything else as I was trying to keep him on track, saying I insisted through the rambling and lack of attention span that the POTUS explicitly say that this is not a quarantine. You also had him in other entries saying that Trump still didn't understand the pandemic, and he described Trump at one point as acting even more erratically. And of course, just after the 2020 election, he wrote, POTUS still insisting the GOP won the election. Completely alternate universe. Kaylee and GOP senators Graham, McConnell, Ted Cruz all prostituting themselves by supporting the POTUS's baseless claims, heading towards a constitutional crisis. With them then adding a week later, continual surge, 138,000 new infections yesterday. POTUS has no interest at all.
Oh my, yeah. People forget how bad the numbers were. I think for a while there was like, how many deaths a day in America was it for a while there? An average about 960 COVID-19 deaths per day occurred in America during 2020, with totals shifting from a spring peak to lower summer numbers and a high winter surge. This total comes from roughly 350,000 to 385,000 total recorded deaths across 366 days of that leap year. The spring surge averaged roughly 900 to 2,000 deaths per day during the initial peak in hotspots like New York. It dropped to a low point averaging 600 to 1,000 deaths per day nationwide during summer, and then climbed and peaked to 2,500 to 3,000 deaths per day. That's what I remembered big time during the end of 2020. What about 2021? 1,100 to 260 deaths per day on average. There were 460,000 deaths in 2021 in America from COVID. Daily average roughly 1,200 deaths per day, Americans. The daily average spiked over 2,400 deaths per day coming out of the 2020 holiday surge. In late summer and fall, the Delta surge happened, and the daily averages rose again to roughly 1,500 to 2,000 deaths per day, driven by the Delta variant. Like, guys, COVID was serious, and Trump was in office when we had our chance to snip it in the bud. Once it got big enough, there was no stopping it fast, and Trump failed in that critical moment.
In the pandemic, he is focusing on blocking Biden from being POTUS. He is embarrassing the USA. However, 72 million people voted for it. Difficult to understand. Craziness has overtaken part of our country.
I did, Pierre. I watched it this morning.
Fauci also deriding what he called the entire extreme right-wing Republican group in the House and Senate, having completely sold their soul to the infinitely lying ex-President Trump. With him then also describing efforts from Paul and other lawmakers to question Fauci over what he viewed as conspiracy theories as an amazing and unbelievable waste of our time, while cases, hospitalizations, and deaths continue to soar. But then also, as far as public perception, besides the misrepresented claims about Fauci's view of the virus's origin, you've also got a lot of right-wing media focusing on his apparent excitement over becoming so well-known and admired. Or you had him writing proudly about his interactions with...
How dare he, as a human being, be like, whoa, the world is paying a lot of attention to me right now. Isn't that kind of crazy? Wow, this is wild. As if literally anybody wouldn't have the exact same... Like, really? We're gonna pretend like he's got, like, a big ego or is a narcissist because the world was paying a lot of attention to him and he was like, whoa, this is cool. It's a natural human reaction.
Celebrities like Barbara Streisand, Julia Roberts, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He saved copies of favorable press coverage, and he noted numerous interviews and media appearances that he had made. He even once wrote that he had achieved the Fauci 5 by appearing on all 5 major Sunday morning TV news shows. You had him literally writing in
Dab
an
on
entry,
him.
"The public adulation of me has been amazing." And another saying, "It is not hyperbole to say that today I am the most famous and talked about person in the country and one of the most recognizable in the world." And that's led to more criticism
True.
from many, including from Paul, who posted an AI-generated image of Fauci as a teenage girl, writing in a diary, for example, while also saying in another post, "While America buried loved ones, Anthony Fauci was counting."
Sorry, liberal. I AI generated a slanderous image of you. You lose.
Headlines that doted over him. And then, of course, this has also sparked backlash from the wider right wing in MAGA world. For example, Health Secretary RFK Jr. blaming the media for building up Fauci and other experts that he accused of lying.
The media malpractice that told us all we had to trust the
Listen to the brainworm, guys. It's talking.
experts, and that he was
It's talking through its vessel.
the expert that they elevated. And anybody who did not give complete blind faith to these expert opinions, which we now know were lies, was marginalized, vilified, demonized, censored.
Canceled.
You also had people like Ben Shapiro taking Paul's claims at face value.
As it turns out that Fauci knew pretty much all along that the origins of COVID were in fact not related to a wet market. Now again, COVID.
See how quick they run with it? The big reach? None of that was the smoking gun that they were looking for, but they're pretending it was. Remember, Ben Shapiro was one of the biggest anti-vaxxer COVID deniers, get everyone back to work, open everything back up, stooges on all of YouTube back when COVID was going down. He was insisting everyone get back to work and go die for the economy. He literally said, I kid you not, like verbatim almost, the economy is more important than your life or your health.
Almost certainly a leak from the Wuhan laboratory. Everyone knows this. Fauci was the bad guy. Not because bad guys know they're being bad, but because they think they're lying for a higher purpose. Right? Fauci was lying because he thought that he was quote unquote doing the right and just happened to align with his personal interests.
And then with all of that, you had people like former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that Fauci needs to face consequences for his alleged crimes, writing in a post, "I'll say it again, Fauci belongs in prison. So many lives were destroyed after the shutdown. Yet I doubt there will ever be accountability." Though then notably there, she added, especially from Trump. He loves the COVID vaccines and thinks he saved millions of lives from Operation Warp Speed, which then makes the blame game even more interesting because with all this,
Yeah, Operation Warp Speed was the COVID vaccine development plan that Trump did heavily push and promote early on when he was president, and he thought that the vaccine would come out under his presidency and be rolled out under his presidency, and he could take credit right before the election. He thought he could take credit for wiping out COVID. He thought it would be a big W for him. It would be the saving grace for his campaign, but he failed. Operation Warp Speed did not warp speed fast enough, and the vaccine ended up finishing under Biden. And so the early Biden presidency is what presided over the rollout of the vaccines and people feeling like COVID was finally starting to wind down and come to an end. And so Trump basically got none of the credit for that. That's one of the rare things that where Trump was actually in the right for a minute there. But then, of course, once Biden was the one presiding over this big vaccine accomplishment that, to be fair, was kind of Trump's accomplishment, if you think about it, Trump 180'd on the issue and became anti-vaccine along with his entire supporter base because he could no longer take credit for the vaccine.
you have people not just talking about investigations or prosecution, but you have accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers between them saying things like, Dr. Fauci should be given the death penalty. And after receiving his fair trial, Anthony Fauci must be hung on live television.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of, lists of people who should be given the death penalty according to Republicans, I guess. Like these Republican accounts have been posting, everyone who should be in prison or get the death penalty. It's just a list of Democrats and then Fauci.
Television as an example. And actually, with all that, I'll say, among other things that are in those diary entries, Fauci also expressed concerns about threats to him and his family. Though as far as the possibility that he could be targeted by the justice system, Paul has already repeatedly referred Fauci for criminal prosecution, but Biden issued a so-called preemptive pardon. However, Fauci still
Yep, Biden knew what they were trying to do. He got out ahead of that shit.
scheduled to testify under subpoena before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, which is chaired by Paul. And he argues
Biden also gave a preemptive pardon to his son because he knew that the Trump administration would almost certainly try to go after his son. whether or not he runs for office, they would try to go after him with lawfare.
The pardon won't protect him from charges based on any lies that he tells tomorrow. So we're gonna have to see what happens there, how it goes down, how Fauci responds to the many questions that he's sure to face about this diary, and whether Paul actually finds a...
Yeah, I like that. If Fauci lies under oath tomorrow, then the pardon won't protect him. Yeah, because he'd be committing a crime tomorrow in the future if he did that. Lied under oath, which he probably won't. What's the point of this? Like, yeah, he's not committed any crimes, but he has to testify if he lies under oath that would be committing a separate crime from any that anyone's accusing him of here. So yeah, of course the pardon wouldn't protect him from that.
Way to get charges pursued. But in the meantime, I gotta hear your initial thoughts, reactions, and where you think this is gonna go in those comments down below. And then
listen, guys, I hope y'all see it the same way I do, that, like, more or less, Fauci handled it about as well as you could hope. Maybe someone else in his place would have done it a bit better, but I think regardless of who it was and how they handled it, we would all be looking back and saying it could have been handled better with our hindsight, and we'd be blaming whoever that person was for not handling it better. Could have been Fauci, could have been Jesus Christ himself, and we'd all be mad. Anyway, though, this all seems like a massive reach. I hope they are not successful in using lawfare against Fauci, all to kind of bring it all around to a win for their anti-vax movement. It would be bad. It would be a pretty big L for science and medicine if they actually managed to get Fauci. Anyway, if you enjoyed this segment, then please consider leaving a like or a comment down below. It really does help a ton on the channel, and it's totally free. Subscribe and ring the bell icon if you want to see more in the future. Follow my social medias linked down below. And, as always, thank you for watching.